Interpretation plus identification plus repetition equals strong emotion. Negative or positive. We've gotten that far. We've learned that much. It should be obvious to us that communication is not key. Communication that's not based in appropriate comprehension leads to confusion. It doesn't minimize it or eliminate its presence in a relationship. It's not what I say that matters so much as what you interpret it to mean for you. Even though the statements belong to us, we are giving them to another person. And I don't know about you. I don't know. Maybe you are one of those weird people that picks gifts by gifting to people what you want for yourself. But I've just always been under the impression that a gift should be given with the person that's being gifted in mind. Like if I'm not going to go buy you a gift, I'm going to go buy you a 3X shirt and you 120 pounds. And then when you don't like the gift, I'm upset. Are you supposed to be flattered with the shirt that's big enough to put your whole family lineage in? So if I'm giving someone a thought or a statement from my mind, then I'm responsible for it being suitable for them. I'm not responsible for what they do with it. I'm not responsible for whether they appreciate it or they value it or they tend to it and take good care of it. That's on them. But it's my job to effectively communicate, to effectively gift to them the idea or the concept in which that I'm looking to communicate. If I haven't effectively communicated, if I have not effectively communicated myself and expressed my point accurately and wholly as it pertains to me in truthfulness, then I can't hold anybody accountable for living up to my expectations. If I cannot communicate it, it can't be comprehended. Even if I effectively communicate it, I'm not responsible for the comprehension or the interpretation of the other being. That is solely on them. The thing is, we get invested with things that we cannot control, and that causes us to live with an internal chaos. I want this person, but I have no control over this person choosing me back. So now I operate from a place of fear that causes me to be something other than myself, no longer even enjoyable to the person that I said all of this was for. And as I partner with my fear, it drives a wedge between my companion. And before you know it, I've accomplished exactly what I was wanting not to happen. I've run to what I was running from, totally missing the fact along the journey that I was en route. You will never get rich trying not to be broke. You will never be successful trying not to be a failure. You will never find love identifying all the spaces that you define as hateful and critiquing and condemning them. Whatever you give attention to in this universe will give attention to you. Motive is a tricky conversation because a lot of times we're convinced that our motive is one thing when it's really another. For instance, if I'm having a conversation with somebody or I'm trying to communicate a point to someone and they did not understand or they misheard or didn't hear at all what I said, and they say, huh? You repeat that? Oftentimes people get upset when they're asked to repeat the things that they said they wanted to communicate to the other person for their own benefit. You said you wanted to tell somebody something to help them and they didn't hear you the first time. And so you said, never mind, and didn't want to repeat yourself. Why were you communicating in the first place? Could it truly be because you wanted to help them and you wanted them to see what it was that you were saying so it could better their life? Or were you speaking to be heard? And that's why when you found yourself not being listened to, you took it so personal that you didn't feel like it was even worth it to run it back. The lies we tell ourselves are ridiculous. Like we would never open our mouths and say that we think ourselves to be too important to say something twice. So we say silly stuff like, I don't know what it is. I just don't really like repeating myself. I never have. When you learn to care about someone other than yourself, when you have something that you believe is beneficial that you look to communicate to them, you'll say it until you blue in the face trying to help them, because you're not speaking to be heard and entertained and esteemed and called smart and complimented or admired or adored or celebrated. You're speaking to be of benefit and of edification of another. once you purify your motives and you're doing everything that you do from a place of love and free will and choice and divine guidance, you'll find yourself less disturbed by the reactions and responses to what you do towards people. You'll find that you're no longer bothered by people's lack of appreciation and their lack of gratitude towards the things that you know you didn't have to do. Because you done finally graduated, you're not doing it anymore for attention and recognition. You're doing it as an outpicturing of what's on the inside. You're being loving because you are love. You've found your identity, the truth of yourself. And that's where you operate from. In that place of consistency, inside of a immovable, unaltering truth, there's nothing that I can do to change the truth of myself. There's nothing I can do to enhance it. There's nothing I can do to decrease it. There's nothing I can do to restart it. There's nothing I can do to terminate it. It is. I am. The narrative of the Bible provides us a metaphorical character that we know as Jesus Christ. And inside of the story, which is supposed to be a word picture or a bunch of word pictures, all pointing back to the truth of ourselves, the truth of all mankind, the truth of the design of the universe. Not so much that the truth of God can be found in the words, not so much that the way the universe works can be uncovered in the verbiage of the scriptures, because we know there are certain parts of the Bible that do not sit side by side with others. It's going to be hard to reconcile the scriptures about the wrath of God coming down upon entire nations and villages and destruction coming upon those people because they were so disobedient to the word of God. And then there's the flip side of that presentation that's contained within the same 66 books of the Bible that many people worship as if it was not constructed over centuries by men, con artists, thieves. There's the story of a woman who clearly went against the law and was found to be guilty by Christ. But Christ turns to the crowd and tells the crowd, let he with no sin cast the first stone. And now there's a group of people who think God is wrathful and angry and jealous and destructive and petty, though all powerful. And then there's a group who leans on the definition of God as grace, forgiving, understanding, compassionate, loving, and kind. And then there are the people who think that God is like them. He's both. He's a little of both. Sometimes he's nice. Sometimes he's angry and jealous and upset with me. And really what I get from God is dependent on his mood and his feelings about what I've been doing in the physical. It's totally conditional. It's really no different than the system that we learned from our parents. If I go to school and I get good grades and I come home and I clean up the house, I won't get a whooping and I might even get a toy. But that's all based on my performance. And when we lived with our parents, we were left up to our parents' interpretation of whether we were on course and focused and on task. As an adult, as I project these things on a divine deity that serves me as I serve him, all of my interpretations and all of my definitions are left up to me to construct. And if I leave my definitions up to my ego to construct along the way, the ego is always going to convince me to keep going in the way that seems most familiar to it. In the course of a day, most of the people that you encounter and communicate with say that they desire some type of change in their life, but if they were honest with you, they feel the same way about change as you do. It's scary. It's really undesirable. I would like for things to stay exactly as they are, but be different. That's a more honest assessment of the mentality that we approach life with. I want to be able to continue to do the things that tear me down, but I want to be lifted up. I would love to continue to not see the value in myself and find someone who sees so much value in me that they won't shut up about it until I believe it too. See, when you get real about what it is that you truly are desiring and you begin to speak it out loud, you can hear the idiocracy in it. You can hear the childishness in the nature of what it is that you desire in your field of fantasy. The sooner that we understand that all things and all people are connected, the better. The sooner we understand that we cannot cause or try to inflict harm on another person for our own gain, and it actually be a successful trip without it scarring us in the process, and it coming with a fight and with a battle and with wars that I did not account for, because as I was locked in on what I wanted out of the situation, I totally forgot that I was not the only entity creating. I was not the one in control. I did such a good job of lying to myself and narrating the story until even I forgot that I did not know what was coming next. Even I forgot that I had no control over what was coming next. My ego did such a good job of convincing me that the plan that it had constructed was so good and so effective that it couldn't go wrong. I sat and imagined one possible outcome to the strategy that I constructed within my ego, and then I moved on it as if that was the only reaction that the person I was trying to affect was capable of. I totally denied in that moment that that person had the free will to have a unique reaction of their own choice. See, the issue is, without self-awareness, as we progress in age, we forget that we haven't put our childish ways away. We actually get under the impression, as we pay bills, go to work, take care of our kids, and do the adult things, we actually forget that the childish systems are still operating underneath all of that. We actually forget that as we do the quote-unquote adulting of raising our kids, we can get real petty and childish about it. But we move the definition of childish to be an insult. So when we hear it, we can defend ourselves against it as we take it as an attack. In some cases, it's a genuine fact that you still operate from the childishness that you are familiar with from your adolescence. It is childish to think that you can encounter anything repetitiously and it not have a negative or positive effect on you. It is absolutely ludicrous to think that you can experience and intake anything and it not alter the inner state of your being. But it just goes to show you how little we are aware of our inner world, because as we encounter things continually and they begin to alter our insides, we really don't recognize any of the changes because we explain them away in the ego when we play the blame game, another childish game from our past. We play the blame game and we pawn off our inconsistencies on the actions of others that took place prior to us exposing the ugliness and bitterness in our heart. If you do something mean to me, if you do something nasty to me, you do something creep to me, and I do something creep back, that makes us the same. And to be real, it has to be deeper analyzed to see if you knew that what you were doing was creep, if you were consciously aware of what you were doing, because I did what I did as a retaliation, which means that I was premeditated with my creepness. Sometimes people do things out of absent-mindedness, out of a lack of sonder, out of a lack of a consideration of the fact that everybody that they encounter in a day and everybody that they don't encounter in a day has a full life just like they do, a whole world inside and out just like you. So to think that everybody is always analyzing you, assessing you, breaking you down, watching your every step is facetious. It's silly. Half the time, nobody's paying you any mind because they're wrapped up inside of their own world just like you are. Most of the mistakes that you're afraid to make, nobody would even notice because half the time, nobody is paying you any attention. Not because you're not cool, not because you're not interested. They just don't have any attention to give. They don't have any attention to take away from what they are obsessing over on the inside of themselves in order for them to disconnect from the illusions that drive them up a wall in order to look over and observe you in the first place. Interpretation plus identification plus repetition equals strong emotion, negative or positive. Our interpretations are based largely in what we identify ourselves with. And this is where the identity crisis inside of our society comes from. We have a bunch of people who do not know what their identity is, and they identify with a world full of temporal things that are constantly coming and going, causing them to have emotional reactions and causing them to constantly need to go back into the act of rebuilding and reconstructing their identity. For instance, say a woman has a child. Before, she was just Susan. But when she leaves with her baby in a few days, she will assume the role as mommy. But we don't see women assume the role as mommy. We see women identify with being a mother so much that they re-identify and reconstruct their entire image and identification through the lens of being a mother. And it's cool for the kid while the kid is small and adorable. And it's convenient for the father while the child is small and adorable. But as the mother grows resentful for giving her entire existence to her child, she'll actually grow to be resentful towards the child and the father. Eventually, both will be to blame for certain chapters in the narrative of their life as they construct elaborate, scientific, egoic reasons for why they are where they are in life today. The ego is not capable of taking blame for anything because it doesn't truly exist. And if you ever came to the conclusion that the ego had led you astray, you would never follow it again. So the only way to keep you dedicated to the ego that you created so that you can experience this illusionary comfort that you have longed for your entire life cannot and will not stand under the light of truth, which is why it's not acceptable to follow the voices of the ego as they attempt to lead you to your imaginary destinations. I'm genuinely interested to know where it is that the average person goes to learn the truth of themselves. Once again, this is an area that we revert back to our childish ways and we play the guessing game. Nothing more than trial and error as we navigate through a life that we continually try to convince ourselves we have figured out. At this point, to act like it's not necessary to write it down and rehearse it and practice it the way you've practiced all the lies that you carry about yourself shows a lack of a desire to get better. We put all of our effort into carrying ourselves off into darkness and entertaining illusions, but we want truth to just come soaring in and save us, and it will. The truth shall make you free. The truth can't set you free because, truth be told, you've always been free. You haven't been confined because you were found guilty. You've been confined because you've assumed yourself guilty. But again, if you aren't aware of the truth of yourself, then how do you even know that? How do you know that you're innocent and blameless? How do you know that you're abundant and promised peace as an inheritance? All your life, you've been putting some really weird things behind I am. And anything you put behind I am, you shall be. I don't care how big my mistake is. You're not going to catch me around here talking about I'm so stupid. I don't care how low my funds get. You're not going to catch me saying I'm so broke. Because once I make the declaration, it becomes a prophecy. And I don't even have to wonder what it is I'm headed for. Because the true responses of God are one or two things: yes and more. We love to complicate God. We've complicated communicating with God. We've made all type of religious practices prerequisites for the experience of the dialogue of the divine when it's as simple as yes and more. But you better believe that as true as that is, the legion of voices that you've partnered with in the miscreation of the illusionary ego that you trust out of familiarity and the erroneous idea that the ego is somehow on your side or has your best interests at heart is going to be just as busy chattering away, trying to get you to take your eyes off of the promise. The true self, the part of you that was created by Source, is always in pursuit of life. The false self, the ego that you created, is always in pursuit of survival. And it's quite ironic when you see it for what it is, because it is the part of you that is always after survival that must be eliminated in order for true life to even begin. Again, the Bible not being a historic book, but being a metaphorical, metaphysical book, it was an outpicturing of the path that must be followed inwardly to enjoy the gift of true life. It's totally irrelevant whether 2,000 years ago a man named Jesus was crucified, but there must be a crucifixion that takes place in order for true life to be experienced by you who has Christ inside of you. The ego must be crucified so that the process of true life and renewal and restoration and resurrection can truly begin, there must be a death. And the only part of you that is capable of dying is the part of you that doesn't really exist in the first place, the ego. I must crucify the ego. Again, you want to know what that's going to look like? Refer back to the story of Jesus Christ being crucified. Jesus was apprehended. He was taken. He was beaten. He was questioned. He was beaten some more. He was stripped of his clothes. He was humiliated. He was loaded with the cross and made to walk up the hill. He was drained, but there was not a death in the story until he was hung up on the cross and left alone. There wasn't a death in the story until the one on the cross gave up his life. And the same is the truth for the ego. Your ego cannot be beaten to death. Your ego cannot be humiliated to death. Your ego cannot be drained to death. Your ego cannot be put on trial and found guilty and just lay down and take the consequences. That's not how this goes. Your ego will remain a thorn in your side as long as you refuse to hang it on the cross and lay down its life. From there can be a burial. There can be an overthrowing of our childish belief systems, and there can be a renewal, a replacement with a knowledge base consistent with truth. New information is able to be deposited as for once in our life we're available to hear and see things that we couldn't before as we were in defense of our ego and our belief systems. And then there's a resurrection. See, this can be far more than a religious story that we argue about the details over, or we debate whether it ever took place historically. It's irrelevant whether it took place historically. It is absolutely relevant, and the only thing that is relevant, that the story unfolds and takes place in you, and that you hang your ego onto that cross, and that you lay down the life of your ego so that the true life, the resurrected you, can rule and reign and be a witness of the power within all mankind. From today forward, identify with nothing else outside of I am. If it's not true about I am, it is not true about me. I don't care what it appears to be in the world of shadows and illusions. I will not and cannot afford to concern myself with the opinions of those who set themselves up as my judges and critiquers, who feel that they can define what it is that they're looking at. I understand that they are my reflection and I am their reflection. As they judge me, they are telling me who they are, not telling me who I am. My identity must be set. My house has to be built on a solid foundation, and my identity is that foundation. The truth is immovable. It does not change. It's inalterable. There's nothing that I can do to make what is true about me today any different or 10 years from now. And what's true about me today was true about me eons ago. If anything in existence is always in existence, that means whatever is in existence now has always been in existence prior to. Why would I sit around and wonder what my ending is going to be when I don't even have a beginning? Once I become aware that I don't have a beginning, maybe I can shake the fear of this terrible ending that I fantasize over. Everything that is said to be true and applicable to Jesus Christ is true and applicable to you. Anything that cannot be applied as a truth to Jesus Christ or the Father is not applicable to you. Whether it comes from a legion of voices inside of you, whether it comes from another mouth that is exposing to you what the legion of voices inside of you is unconsciously saying, it doesn't matter. I will not partner with anything less than the truth about me. I will not partner with anything less than the truth about you. I will not partner with less than anything than the truth about I am, our Father, the source, all. If these definitions and these identifications are built on truth and they are set, a lot of the spinning and twirling that I do as I try to find satisfaction in this temporal world will end immediately. Lock in.